them, wouldn't we, Kel?
Oh, yeah, we absolutely would. And you know what? We have Vlad here right now, and we'll bring him on. Hey, Vlad, how are you tonight? You know what, Vlad? We've got a full house here in the studio. We've got Gadi Aileman, and we've got Dee, the Crimson Warrior. We've got Moving Forward. We've got Tim, and we've got Kel, and now we have you. But how are you tonight, my dear man?
I'm good. A little bit cold. As I talk to you, I'm mucking my way through our first big winter storm. The snowbanks are about 2.5 feet high.
Wow,
I mean, just 2 days ago it was 15 degrees, but it's just winter can come in 24 hours. It's pretty amazing. So I'm working my way home through the snow, but there's a lot to talk about. That's for sure. Has anybody discussed Corsica yet?
This would be to do with the locals in Corsica who've taken exception to the activities of Muslims doing what Muslims do best, which is creating chaos, and they have gone out of their way to destroy a Muslim prayer centre, and of course it's been condemned by the local authorities as a terrible example of Islamophobia. Now, if there's an update on that, Vlad, I'd be most keen to hear about it. But that's what I've heard about it, and I dare say the story's developing as we speak. But that's the basic story that I have, and that's in Corsica.
So I would not like to update it, but I would like to take a deeper dive on that. It's my opinion that it's the single most important thing going on right now, and I'm going to tell you why. When you said that thing Muslims do, you're quite right. But that needs further examination just as soon as the snowplow goes by. Sorry. Quite inconvenient. But it's okay. Oh, he's going the same way I am. How lucky for me. Just a second. I'm almost by. Here we go. Okay, so that thing Muslims do is that they do what they do all across Europe, and that just about never makes it in the news, and certainly never makes it in the mainstream news, although it will make it to blogs, it will make it to private people's Facebook posts until people like Merkel and so on see to it that it can't. And that is that they will deliberately create an emergency event and then lay in wait to ambush emergency vehicles, and they will continue this tactic until the local municipal authorities or state or federal authorities essentially unofficially declare that area to be a no-go zone and don't send emergency services there anymore, and therefore lose actual national sovereignty over the territory, and it becomes part of the new balkanized Muslim state, you see. Now, I'm emphasizing this process because it needs to be understood that there's nothing chaotic or unplanned about it. Now, what's interesting is there's a few things that need to be known about the events which I think make it stand out and make the reaction stand out. Now, yes, so some Muslims had taken an area of the capital city of Corsica, and they had Islamized it. And they were also, some individuals had applied for state grants to operate something like a gym and a library or something, I don't know, but some artificial auspices under which they could get state funding to run an institution, but in reality they were operating a mosque. So it needs to be understood that in France they have strict laws called laïcité, which means secularism, right? It's like 100 years. France has been operating as an officially secular state. It's something I think every country got to do. It's my own humble opinion, but the idea is that if you want to have a synagogue or a church or a mosque, you may do so, but you should pay for it yourself. That the general public should not have to subsidize you with tax money to spread your religious doctrine. That strikes me as eminently reasonable. So France has had that for 100 years, but the Muslims have been doing workarounds now for quite a while, and the French government seems to be turning a blind eye. So we have a situation in Corsica where a mosque was operating illegally, and everyone knew it. All the locals knew that they were getting heavy subsidies from the government to do something which was illegal for anybody else. So the people that were affiliated with this particular mosque were the same people that set up this ambush for the fire truck, you see? Mm-hmm. So when they did this thing, the people of Corsica rose up and enforced the law. And I want to make this emphatically clear. What they did in their action was to go after an institution that was already illegal, and against the individuals who had done an act of terrorism by creating an emergency and then setting up an ambush for emergency workers, right? Mm-hmm. So now you have the people of the city of Corsica that are being painted as Islamophobic vigilantes, when in fact what they had done was simply doing what the government is obliged to do and well paid for to do, which is create and enforce the laws that weren't doing. Okay? So this may be the first fight back we've seen against this process that Muslims have done around the world to create Islamic zones and to destroy classical civilization. And I think it's really important that we watch and support them. It's really important that they win, because this could be a template for everywhere else. And I think that our eyes and support have to be with these guys, because whichever way it goes, I just think a lot of powerful people are watching, right? Either you crush this counter-revolution, and that's what the Corsicans are doing. It's a counter-revolution against the socialist Islamic revolution, against classical civilization. Now, there's one more element to this, which I have to say I'm going to be a bit fuzzy on, because I haven't quite finished working it out. But I'm going to just float it out there and see if other people want to pick up the mantle and research it or think about it. I know I'm going to be working with a couple of people on this and see if I can't come up with a solid treatise, or it's possible that I may not be correct on this one, but I'm going to float it anyway, premature as it may be, okay? Mm-hmm. There's a thing called the CVE, that's Charlie Victor Echo. And it stands, in this case, it stands for counter-violent extremism. Now, that's not just a stupid set of words. It's an actual policy created by Obama and some of his henchmen at top levels in the United States, okay? Now, the counter-violent extremism narrative is an idea that was fomented in order to turn the idea of terrorism on its head. It's basically, you could say that it's kind of like a link in the chain which includes UN Resolution 1618 and all of these other anti-blasphemy bills, right? So the counter-violent extremism narrative is the idea where if a person were to be a strong supporter of, let's say, Jeffersonian liberalism and the U.S. Constitution, that would technically make them, according to this document, which this is not airy-fairy. This is something actually created and being enforced by Obama and some of his henchmen. I'm being vague with it, like I said, this is not fully baked yet, and I haven't got the numbers, facts, and figures on hand. But I can tell you that if you look up, if you Google the video by Stephen Coughlin on countering violent extremism, when he was guest hosting for Jamie Glazov and the Glazov gang, you can see a 13-minute video, which is solid but overly condensed, so it can be hard to follow. But it's already out there on YouTube. You can find this. Now, so I would recommend that if before people think about Corsica in these terms, they may want to watch that Coughlin video on countering violent extremism. But the point is that this document basically says that a person waging jihad is in essence, following their religious freedom, but a person who believes in countering jihad is an extremist, and if he does so using any kind of force, he's a violent extremist, such as joining the U.S. Army. Now, I know that sounds ludicrous on the surface of it, but that's actually what it says. So we have a U.S. doctrine, CVE, which is an attempt to reverse the entire moral compass of jihad and attacks on civilization versus defense of individual liberty. Now, why I'm bringing that up in this context is because if you look at the way the reporting has been on Corsica, now, Tim, you're one of the most astute and careful observers I know. And when I heard you describe Corsica, I heard a very good description of what took place despite the reporting on it and not because of it. And still, there were really important salient facts missing because you have to dig so hard for those facts. And the thing is that the CVE narrative what is distorting the reporting on these events, such that people are like, if you watch even the RT stuff, which the RT is better than average, like Russian TV, Ruptly TV it stands for, but the Ruptly TV stuff is better than, let's say, MSNBC or CNN as a general rule. They're willing to tell you more truth than other people are, because we live in an odd period of history where the truth is more in Russian interest than American. But for some reason, when they're discussing Corsican events, they are not actually. They're still making it look like the Corsican peasants who are rising up against this Islamic actions and attempts to create Sharia zones and no-go zones. Even Ruptly TV is misrepresenting it as being, these guys are hostile, violent racists against Muslims or something. It's a ludicrous thing. And even though I have to say, it is true that the chants they've been doing have been Arabs get out or Arabs go home or something, which is, I find that a little bit unfortunate. But if you talk to anybody who spent time in Corsica, you could see that the confusion of Arabs with Muslims is understandable, and they don't actually mean Christian Arabs who aren't a problem. They mean Muslims, and they mean Muslims even who aren't Arab. But if you look at the people who are actually talking about in Corsica, that's how they see the problem. But there's one French TV station, and it's a very minor one, and it's just on the internet. It's sort of like the Czech independent TV, but it's a lot more solid and a lot better than that. And they have a segment on this where all the facts are being spoken of clearly and effectively. And I'm working on getting that translated right now. And I'm hoping to actually be able to put up a video with a detailed report of what's actually taking place in Corsica. So, again, I'm just going to wrap all this up with two things. One, it's very important that we watch it for a couple of reasons, because I think it may be the first real, proper, effective pushback where the people themselves rise up to enforce their own existing laws and their rights as citizens. And I mean, this is not breaking the law. This is enforcing the law. It's just being done in a sloppy way because they don't have millions of dollars. They don't have guns. They don't have the institutions. They don't have the police and the training and the jails. They're just a bunch of guys that say the police and the governments are not enforcing our laws. In fact, they're encouraging to be broken by one group and one group only, and we're going to put a stop to it. Okay, so it's important. It's important to watch this because we're seeing the people rise up, and hopefully they'll they'll take down the existing sort of political order there and reform something new that works again. It's a counter-revolution that's needed to deal with the quiet one that seems to have replaced democracy, and that is one reason to watch it. And the other is you have to watch it because to see to what extent the CVE Doctrine is being used to report this everywhere, such that we can't make an intelligent decision, a judgment about what's taking place, because we're simply being lied to about cause and effect.
Yeah, I think the point that you made about the narrative being turned on its head with this counter-violent extremism, I must say I hadn't really recognised the full effect of what this phrase actually meant. But the way you're describing it, I mean, in order for Islam to be successful, it has to effectively put forward it either has to slaughter everybody that disagrees with it, or it has to put forward a narrative which basically says we're the good guys and everybody else is the bad guys. And I frequently refer to Islam. Some people say to me, well, Islam doesn't have a moral system or an ethical system at all. And I say, well, yes, it does. It's just that the difference is that the morals and the ethics and the values of the Islamic ideology are completely 180 degrees the opposite of those morals, values and ethics of Judeo-Christian civilization that we have built our societies upon. And if Islam is going to take over those societies, it certainly helps if you've got a narrative in the form of the CVE, the counter-violent extremism narrative, that effectively paints Muslims as the good guys who are just following their religious principles of jihad, and everybody else who opposes it as the bad guys, to the point that they are not just people who disagree. They're actually labelled as extremists. And of course, this ties in with some legislation that was being proposed in England about just over a year ago, where they were going to introduce laws that would clamp down on extremist use of social media. And of course, what we found was that it was being drafted in such a way that the people who would be described as extremists were actually the counter-jihad guys, and it would be much easier to go after the counter-jihad guys because they're not likely to cause riots in the streets in the way that Muslims are, than it would be to go after Islam and extremist Muslims and the whole ideology of Islam, which is basically the problem. It's I won't say it's clever. It's diabolically crafty to try and produce a narrative that runs so counter to what if you look at it in common sense terms, we understand that what Islam does is terrorism pure and simple, and it was designed for the purposes of terrorizing non-Muslims, terrorizing the infidel, so that Islam could become supreme throughout the world. And to have it turned around in this way is something that needs to be fought against very strongly. I mean, I'm in total agreement with you, Vlad, in that it is something that's very. If it were to succeed, we would have a huge chunk of our ability to fight back taken away from us, and we're currently finding freedom of speech is under threat at the moment. But something like that looks as though, if it's allowed to succeed, and it could succeed because most people, when they're presented with this kind of narrative, they don't like to think about it too deeply. They're too busy earning a living, keeping a roof over their head, trying to feed their family, and they don't pay. Most people don't pay much attention to what's going on unless it directly affects them personally. And at this stage, which is the early stage of Islam spreading its tentacles throughout Western society, people don't feel threatened in the way that we do. We do because we've done the research. You and I and everybody else in the counter-jihad movement has done the research and can see quite clearly what the problem is. But where you've got a lot of people who don't see what the problem is and who can be convinced by a narrative like CVE, probably without too much trouble, then of course we've got a big problem unless we can get our side of the story out.